Good evening. This is the start of the regular Planning Commission meeting. It's Thursday, January 31st, 6:31 p.m. We're sitting here in the City Hall Council Chambers, and I will start with call to order on my left.
Mark Boffman.
Ritu Jayandapuri.
Eric Wicks.
Shannon Collins.
Larry Crandall.
Roshino Farrell.
Very good, and we have 6 commissioners present tonight, which represents a quorum. So we are all set for our public hearing. The next item of business is the approval of the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
There's a motion and a second to approve the agenda. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed say no. And the agenda is approved unanimously. The next item of business is the approval of the minutes from the January 17th, 2019 meeting. Any changes, comments, suggestions?
I move the minutes be of the January 17th meeting be approved as distributed.
Second.
There's a motion and a second to approve the meeting minutes from January 17th. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed say no. And the meeting minutes are passed unanimously. So this is the time when we will entertain public comment on non-agenda items. Is there anyone tonight who'd like to speak on a non-agenda item? Mary Victor?
Before the starts, I just wanted to remind everyone that the defending champion on Jeopardy tonight at 7:30 p.m. is a Montessori teacher from Sammamish, Washington. So can we finish by then? No. And you watching it at home, we're certain to allow you to turn to channel 4 at 7:30. That's all.
Awesome.
Mary, go ahead.
What is? My name is Mary Wicker. I live at 408 208 Avenue Northeast in Sammamish. I'm speaking tonight. I had, so community character and neighborhood character has been very important. So I read something called How to Build Community. It was a card I bought recently. I read it at a recent city council meeting, and I got enough feedback from the council, from planning commissioners, and from the public that I ordered cards, so you each have a copy. And then while I ordered it, I actually found out there's a How to Build Global Community. So instead of rereading the How to Build Community, I thought I'd read How to Build Global Community. Think of no one as them. Don't confuse your comfort with your safety. Talk to strangers. Imagine other cultures through their art, poetry, and novels. Listen to music you don't understand. Dance to it. Act locally. Question consumption. Know how your lettuce and coffee are grown. Look for fair trade and union labels. Help build communities from the bottom up. Acquire few needs. Learn a second or third language. Visit people and places and cultures, not tourist attractions. Learn people's history. Redefine progress. Know physical and political geography. Play games from other cultures. Watch films with subtitles. Know your heritage. Honor everyone's holidays. Look at the moon and imagine someone else, somewhere else, looking at it too. Read the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Understand the global economy in terms of people, land, and water. Know where your bank banks. Never believe that you have the right to anyone else's resources. Don't confuse money with wealth or time with money. Have a pen or email pal. Honor indigenous cultures. Judge governance by how well it meets all people's needs. Be skeptical about what you read. Eat adventurous. Enjoy vegetables, beans, and grains in your diet. Choose curiosity over certainty. Know where your water comes from and where your wastes go. Assume that many others share your dreams. Know that no one is silent, though many are not heard. Work to change this. And so I read a card version. I also have over on the counter, there's bookmark versions if you can read that little print and you think those might be useful. I did find one packet in Spanish online for the How to Build Community. And I did want to say that I think the card itself evokes its own thing. You can get 12 postcards in one. It says, printed by union labor in the United States on recycled paper, with at least 50% post-consumer waste, processed chlorine-free, no dioxin. And then this plastic bag says, bags are biodegradable cellophane, not oil-derived plastic. So I think it's a good example of things that if more of us thought about doing, we probably have a better, healthier community. So I did have to purchase the products. I wasn't sure if it was copyrighted or not, but I wanted to respect whoever wrote it and the artwork on it. And I would ask that you read it, maybe think about it. If you're not interested in it, just return it over there. If you'd rather have a different size, something fine. And then when you think you're done with it, instead of recycling it, let's reuse it, share it with someone, send it to someone. And if you want another copy for a friend or somebody you want to send it to, they're over there, and I will be distributing them at the city council meeting as well, because I had read it and they had asked for it. So thank you for listening.
Thank you, Mary. Good things to think about. Paul Stickney?
Good evening, Commissioners. Paul Stickney at 22626 Northeast Inglewood Road. On Monday morning, Mary and I attended the Legislative Committee meeting, which was interesting. And the third item, although it's unlikely to happen, is a pretty scary item for Sammamish. There is legislation being, proposed to upzone all cities in the urban area up to R6, as well as a significantly higher R near all transit corridors and things. And the staff has sent a letter to the Association of Washington Cities, and they did a real good job in that letter. Rather than talk about that at length, I sent an email after attending that and asked for a copy of the audio file, because there was a lot of really important chat by the three council members there and the two consultants, the two lobbyists, that's the word I want. So I will send you a copy of the agenda packet and a link to that audio file. So if you want to hear it, it was about a 45-minute meeting if you have an interest in it. And then I got a copy of the legislation as well. And we each had a comment there, and my comment is that that would be a travesty for the city to upzone number 6. So I'll send it all to you because I think it ties in with land use and the charge of the, planning commission. I'll spend it out. So that's it.
Thank you, Paul. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak on a non-agenda item tonight? No? Okay, so I'll close the non-agenda public comment for this evening. So the next item of business is old business, and tonight we have a public hearing. It's a public hearing on the draft permanent development regulations. So we've been working on the interim development regulations, and now we have the draft permanent development regulations. So what I envision for tonight's public hearing is we'll have a presentation from staff, we'll have a chance to ask questions, but we'll kind of be careful not to deliberate at that point. And then I'll open the public hearing, close the public hearing, we'll have a motion, we'll deliberate, and then we'll vote. And so that's kind of order of events for tonight. And with that, I will turn it over to Mr. Pyle.
Thank you. Good evening, members of the Commission. David Pyle, Department of Community Development. So we are here following 4 workshop meetings, and we're here tonight to talk about the proposed permanent development regulations that we've been working on. Following the last meeting on January 17th, I made some final edits to the draft code, which is included in the packet as Exhibit 1. And I included some of the items that you had talked about that you then directed us to consider including in the code. I have talked to some of you over the phone, and we are here tonight to answer any questions you might have. And what I'll do is I'll walk you through the code concepts And if you have any questions, feel free to ask them. We'll hear what the public has to say, and then we could proceed with deliberations as Chair Collins suggested. If you recall, the changes are largely organized by topic, and the primary focus is on operative language. We've heard comments about some of the code sections, the peripheral sections that were already in the code. So we've received comments by email from members of the public. We've also received comments from members of the commission about some of the peripheral language that happens to be in Exhibit 1. A lot of that language is remnant from the old code. So there are things in there that we did not include at this point, or we have not added. They're merely remnant pieces from the old code that we are not proposing on changing. Secondary focus is the dimensional setting. If you recall, development regulations are kind of like a lever or a dial. If we're talking about a setback, you could adjust the dial one way or another. If you're talking about building height, you can adjust the dial one way or another. So again, focusing on the operative language and whether or not the concept is properly achieved in the code is really where we want to be. So also note that there were some ancillary changes that were made where it didn't change the outcome or the code operation, such as changing the word street setback to front yard setback. It really was in line with the change in how we're handling setbacks altogether, but there are terms that are used in the code that we have to then change to make that change complete in the code to make it function properly. The first of these is density rounding, and we had talked about this at the last meeting, what is exactly the right fit and how to make it work. So in this case, units are rounded based on the two numbers truncated past the decimal point. In the past, we had seen that if you were able to just obtain a few more hundred square feet, it could have tipped the scale. So there was pressure on setting property boundaries a certain way, things like that. So in this case, if we're just truncating the number, it simplifies it for us. The next is that projects that are earning more than or equal to 10 units, so standard subdivisions, long plats, before rounding would round up at a fraction of greater than or equal to 0.51. The other is that projects that are earning less than or equal to 9 units, so short subdivisions, before rounding, would round at greater than or equal to 0.71. So if you had a project that was, say 9.75 was what they were earning, it would trip it into a 10-unit division. They would round up, and that would actually make it a long plat. So one of the complexities here with rounding is that you might start through a calculation as a short plat, and then you might do the density calculation and realize that you've earned an extra unit, so therefore now you're in a long plat. It's really not that much of a difference in process, aside from the fact that we require a public hearing as part of the subdivision process. The other was that when you're building more than 25% of the units as townhomes or duplexes, you would round up at greater than or equal to 0.21. So what this does is it helps incentivize the construction of duplexes or townhome units, as the commission had identified that, hey, if you were going to get an extra unit out of it, what if that unit was in the form of a duplex? Also realize that the code does offer incentives for townhomes. Currently, if you were to build an affordable unit, a townhome, which is really 2 units, is only counted as 1 unit. So there's also that incentive. So you could see if the units were affordable units, they could be building even more units under this scenario. With regard to setbacks, we changed the designation of setbacks from street and interior to front, side, and rear. We created 3 categories for setbacks. The first category is just a broad-based category that is as it relates to all structures. An example of this might be if you wanted to build a large trellis, an outdoor kitchen in your backyard that was considered to be a structure, you would have to meet the general structure setback. The next is primary detached dwellings. This would be homes. If you want to build a new home, there is a setback that corresponds to the home size that was inserted in the code. So what happens if you have a less than a 2,500 square foot home, there is a certain setback that would apply to that. Between 2,500 and 4,000 square feet, there is another category of setback that would apply to that. And then above 4,000 square feet, there is another category of setback that would apply. I did, in response to what the commission asked, turn down the just slightly in an effort to try to fine tune it. Again, if there are comments on more appropriate placement of that number. One thing to think about is what the old code, or what the code that was in place prior to the passing of the interim regulations was achieving, and then what the initial passing of the interim regulations was achieving. And for us, that sort of sets bookends on the thinking around where we want to be with setbacks and how large of a home could be built on what size of a lot. So what we did was we looked at what the interim regulations were achieving, and then we tried to center it a little bit between the interim regs and the old rule that we had. If you think about this, you think about the genesis of the code and where it comes from. The city inherited the code from King County upon incorporation and took it over as its own. The standards around setbacks largely had not been changed in the city until 2016, when the interior setback was changed from 5 feet to 5'7", and I remember the last number 15, or yeah, 5'7" and 15. So there was some progression made there, although setbacks in the city had been the same since incorporation. So as the industry changes and we see different size homes be built, we also want to think about how those setbacks correspond to different size homes. The industry could go back the other way. The market demand for homes could push back towards smaller homes again. Currently, just a quick look on some of the builders' websites in the city as to what was available and being sold. I was noting homes in the 4,000 square foot range were seemingly what they had targeting on their websites. If you wanted to look at that, you look that up yourself. You could think about who some of the common builders are here, go to their websites, and you would immediately see what homes they are selling and what size lots those homes are on. The next was building height. And with regard to building height, we made 3 changes. The last change here listed here was one that was added just recently in response to the commission's request. The first change was that we changed the method of building height measurement from average finished grade to average existing grade. The second was we limited the facade height of an individual facade to 40 feet, and we included some specific exceptions. If you were to integrate architectural modulation into that facade, it could go higher than that. We also added, the last one that we recently added was an 18-foot height restriction for standalone detached accessory dwelling units. The next is related to mass grading. We added a prohibition on mass grading. We added restrictions on excavation and fill to qualify what is considered mass grading and to clarify what is allowed. Fill is limited to 5 feet and may be allowed up to 8 feet in exceptional circumstances. Exceptional circumstances are defined in the code. Excavation is limited to 10 feet. And exceptions were added for road construction or necessary underground infrastructure and structures that do not change the surface elevation. So this one started with the interim regs. We met with builders, talked to members of the community, and realized that there were some exceptions that could be included that would allow for development to proceed, things like road construction, vault construction, foundations, things that don't artificially change the topography of the ground on a large scale. We also added a design standard for garages on slope sites that pushes designers to locate a garage in more of a logical place in order to avoid over-excavation. We added restrictions prohibiting speculative clearing before construction permits are issued. This was a problem we've had in the past here where we hadn't quite reached the full design of engineering and the builder was asking already for a permit to go ahead and start clearing the site. So that's one that we definitely wanted to add. With fence heights, we added an allowance for fences up to 8 feet. Per the commission's direction, we limited that to 32 feet in length along any setback line. Requires an agreement with the affected neighbor, requires a building permit, and it may not cause inconsistency with other adopted codes or standards. The next is parking. We added a requirement that 1 additional parking space be provided for each new lot created to subdivision. We added clarifying language regarding where the parking must be located, and we included a hierarchy of priority, that if the designer can demonstrate that they cannot functionally locate that on a road, that they could then put it in an area managed by an HOA or finally in the driveway that services the home. With regard to street frontage, we added a requirement that all new lots created through subdivision be designed to include 30 feet of street frontage on a public or private street. This is one that started with the interim regs. However, after talking to builders and members of the community, we understood that if we were to allow new homes being built, new lots being created to front private streets, that would also achieve the objective and the desired outcome. We also added flexibility allowing averaging of street frontage across the project with a minimum of 20 feet and cumulative average of 30 feet for all the lots created. The next one actually came from a member of the public in response to public comment. And this is that a critical areas work permit requirement be added for all new work in a critical areas, or any work in a critical area would require a permit. So with that concludes the presentation that I have. The next steps are to hold a public hearing, deliberate on this, and potentially make a recommendation. We do plan to meet with the City Council and hold a workshop on this on the coming Monday, February 4th.
Thank you, Mr. Pyle. Excellent presentation. Covered a lot of ground, as always. All right, so I think I'll go ahead and open the public hearing. So oh, I'm sorry. I'm supposed to let you guys ask questions. Questions? Nothing. Okay, no questions. Oh, Mark.
One thing we did talk about a few times, and maybe I just didn't interpret the language correctly, but was trying to limit the grading at the perimeter of a development next to it. And I didn't see that, and I kind of thought I was going to see it, so I was just curious, is that on the future list, or was there a reason not to do it, or what happened?
Yeah, that is one that's fairly tricky due to the fact that not every lot is created equal. Not every project is the same size. So we would definitely be considering that as part of the phase 2. We started looking at that and considering that we in the past had really no restriction on grading. With this change in rule, we've come a long way, and we actually have tools in our toolkit now to work with builders to try to prevent as significant of a grade change. However, the one that you raise is really sort of that blended edge question of how do you blend an edge around a project so that you don't have an abrupt rockery that might affect someone's tree roots or cause for some fill that's being placed right on the property line. And it's really about that continuity and character from site to site. And when we started looking at that and how that might apply to some of the projects we've seen, you might have a sort of irregularly shaped lot. And if you were to apply it, say, 10 feet out or something along those lines, it can be tricky to apply that in nooks and crannies of the site, or in areas where the site might be narrower or on a small site. So we would have to think about a way to draft that is dynamic, kind of like how we drafted the setback regulations, that might correspond to lot width and depth and lot size. So we might have categories, and it was more complex than we were able to include at that point. And we also felt confident that with the changes that were made to some of the restrictions on grading, that we do have tools in our toolkit now to help us minimize the significant changes that we were seeing in the past.
Shannon, I just had, David, something that I had brought up over the course of our discussion when we were talking about setbacks, and especially how a new development looks from a major arterial or a minor or a collector arterial, and with these new setbacks, do we have anything in there? So yes, maybe we have increased our setback, but in terms of providing some kind of a privacy barrier between the home and how it looks from the point of view of the person walking by or driving by, where we can see right into the neighbor's home, do we require any kind of a privacy barrier where it would shield both the homeowner and the person on the street from each other, basically?
So we did include an increased setback along projects at front streets, but we do not have a landscape standard for any of our subdivisions, aside from what is required in the public works standards in the form of street trees. One thing that would be of value is for us to, in the future, create another process where a builder might be able to pursue a plan unit development, and where they might be able to achieve some additional density or achieve some additional flexibility if they are willing to come in with a superior product that actually addresses some of the continuity, the character concerns. A plan unit development project gives the city some additional tools in the form of design review to work with an applicant to address concerns that are raised by the public, to help assess and analyze how that project might better fit into the context and character of surrounding community. We might, for example, utilize an on-call architectural consultant to help us through that process. So one of the things that we're looking at with our phase 2, which may start here in the fall of 2019, would be to add a plan unit development section. And that's a pretty easy change to make to our code, because what we do is we just design an entirely new chapter that doesn't have some of the baggage of the old code, and would allow for an optional process. So what it does is it creates two different categories a builder could pursue. One is a prescriptive category where it's sort of a safe haven, you know what the rule says. The rule maybe is more restrictive now than it was in the past. It depends who you are, what you're trying to achieve. But if a builder wanted some additional flexibility or to achieve some additional density, and they were able to consider the design requirements, consider the character requirements, consider the criteria for designing a plan unit development, and they were willing to go through the process and work with the community closely through the project, then they may be able to pursue a project that would be rewarding to them and to the community.
Okay. All right, thank you.
My question, first of all, a great big appreciation for the community development, all of the people who worked on this project in developing these regulations. I was listening and not looking at the screen. Did you say anything about focus group? If you did, I missed it. And
we did not, but we did utilize a focus group earlier on in the process. So that occurred, what was that? I'm trying to remember the date of that. Early December. So your first workshop on this issue occurred prior to our informing and meeting with the focus group. Your second meeting on this was after we met with the focus group.
Thank you.
One thing I wanted to point out for Rasheen was it's a 30-foot setback on the arterials now.
Yeah, and I was glad to hear that and see that. But when
Now you're talking about the landscaping in between.
yeah, and because we talk a lot about neighbourhood character, and I think it's something that's very important to our community, and how, especially when you drive down a road one day and there was trees and so forth there, and then suddenly they're not there anymore. So that's a shock to the system, and we kind of adjust and we roll with it. So what are we putting in place that when we're driving again down that road or walking down that road, that we're not just looking into somebody's kitchen, and also the people who have bought this $1 million home are not on view for everyone to see and have to wait 5-10 years for all those new trees to grow in and gain some privacy. So I think it's just something worth thinking about, and if we see it, I see it more, time and time again every time I drive around the city or walk around the city. So it's something that occurs to me every single day as we drive up 228, and I'm sure it occurs to everybody. So I just wanted to bring it up again. But I think it's an important issue.
Definitely, it's a really good point. Hopefully with 30 feet,
Yeah.
it would look funny if you didn't have anything in there, right?
Right.
So let's hope for some trees.
On that subject, I have a question about, so it says 30-foot front yard setback from arterials, and I was just curious, how often did we have someone with a front yard on an arterial? It doesn't seem like does that happen often?
It just depends. It's probably less common than fronting on a local street, but we do have several arterials where we've seen development going along them.
I have a quick question about the front yard setback and the allowed projections into the setback, and was wanting to, the language leads me to believe that you can have up to 2 projections 10 feet wide each. Is that the intent, or is it a total of 10 lineal foot of projection that's either 30 inches or 18 inches, depending on the yard that it goes into?
So that is not a section of code that we have changed with this process.
So, okay, and the reason I say this is something that kind of I zoom in on often because it's part of my work. So when I look at something, I just started doing so quick kind of scenarios and looking at minimum lot widths, looking at side yard setbacks, and then looking what the resulting kind of facade of the house might be, and then
Do you have
looking.
Do you have a page number?
It is on 23 of 29 on today's. Lower, it's the, I don't know if it's the PDF page number, but it's, so you gotta go back a couple pages to where it says on the bottom right-hand corner, 23, 21 of.
21 or 29?
Yeah,
Okay.
sorry, did I say 23? Keep going.
Hope I don't make everyone seasick.
Right there. So it talks about, not wider than 10 feet, limited to for facades. So I would say, you could have maybe 20 foot of this projection that's 30 inches into your front yard. You could end up really dramatically drawing that perceived facade closer to the street by 2.5 feet closer than the setback out of the gate.
I'd agree with you.
So that was just a thing that came up. I don't know if that's really what we want. I hope it doesn't cause any other changes to be made.
Also note that we did increase the front yard setback with this project. So
Right, so in an R4, you'd have 15 front yard, and you could end up having maybe 12.5 feet to the front of a 30-inch projection. And so that if it was 2 10-foot projections on a 30-foot facade, suddenly 20 of the 30-foot is, I don't know, if there's probably other limitations maybe throughout the code, but it was just something that I noticed.
So as an architect, do you feel that those are positive amenities to add to a building in terms of its attractiveness?
I do agree with that. However, I guess it depends on the percentage of it, right? It becomes the facade instead of an appendage to the facade if you do too much of it. So there's kind of some limitations there. And I can see it as a way of working around and actually getting closer to the street, even though I agree that it might make it more interesting house. I think that's all.
Okay. Any more questions? All right, so I will now open the public hearing. Public hearing is now open, and I'll wait for the list. So anyone wishing to speak during the public hearing will have 7 minutes. The first person on the list happens to be Mary Wichter. And if you're not on the list and you'd like to speak, anyone is welcome to speak after that.
Hello, my name is Mary Wichter. I live at 408 208th Avenue, Northeast in Sammamish. I did email in and printed copies for you. I'm not going to go through it all because I think some of it's just typos, errors, and omissions and a few questions. But I did want to cover the most important things. My first one is that it is important to have a permit or require a permit when you're doing something in a critical area. But when you have the threshold that you have to have a permit, it's not just that you go and you pay the money and you have a permit. There needs to be things like, where are the clearing limits set? Are they getting set? Are they being maintained? At the end of the project, is the project going to slide down the hill into the drainage ditch and things like that? So I'm concerned, and I wonder if the drafted permanent development regulations, if the wording, like if a builder or an owner just wants to go out and move amounts of soil in their yard or remove earth or bring in fill, especially in a critical area, will that be allowed? Or, because I haven't traced all the way the code through. If a house or building structure is being constructed, it doesn't have sufficient support because there's either cuts or slopes that either leak water or impact septic or would move or fall over time, we shouldn't be signing off those projects until they're done. I read somewhere that landscaping has to be at least 30% of the yard, but maybe it was 30 feet, maybe I misread that. But if it's only 30%, what's the other 70%? I do know owners use pesticides, they kill off blackberries and weeds, they don't ever revegetate. That's bad for water quality, erosion, and stormwater. I do know builders and owners that put down beauty bark, they do it scantily, they don't plant any plants, and there's no vegetation for the yard. Landscaping should be required for every lot that is not vacant, whether it's old or new. Also, people use impervious sheeting like black plastic. They put it under things like mulches. It becomes hidden impervious surface. I haven't seen anything in the regulations that say that's not okay. And most importantly, temporary and erosion and sediment control is pretty strong in the code, but I really think there needs to be either the landscaping or the permanence, because a project just can't temporarily do the erosion control and then they're done and then you have erosion and sediment problems afterward. There needs to be some permanent. And on that note, I had spoken with Bellevue about 2 years ago or a year ago, and I believe David Powell used to work there. They use a restoration period with a surety performance bond. So when a project is done, the bonding is held for a year until it's gone through like a whole wet season, so you can see it and then it's returned if there are not problems. And I don't know if that's in our code. I do not believe it is. Anyway, it's not clear to me that the sentence added to do the permit for clearing, any clearing and grading in a critical area. Does that cover development and maintenance of yards? And what if you're doing rockeries that are under 4 feet and you want to do slope cuts? You need to have a permit. That needs to be looked at. If you do any clearing at all or any grading, if you're moving any soils or lands disturbance, that's actually what causes problems in steep slopes, landslide, and geohazard areas, including erosion. If you're grading or regrading land, it's very important. So I'd like to make sure that that's covered. If it is covered, fine, but the way I'm reading it, it doesn't seem really clear. I also would like to see the grading. They chose the number of 5 feet rather than 4 feet for the grading. I know Redmond uses 4 feet. The reason I want the 4 feet versus 5 feet is you can do 4 feet and you can put a rock wall and you don't need a permit, but as soon as it's over 4 feet, then you need to have a permit. I want people being able to clear 5 feet, not put a rock wall in, and then have a gap between a rock wall they might add later, not under a permit. It just seems like we have a foot gap and that's going to cause problems. On fences, Basically, I do believe that 8 foot being is required in a short and focused area as possible. I'd rather see vegetation there, but I do understand that it should be allowed through a permit. But less fences, lower fences, transparent fences, or nice looking fences I think are better because we have connectivity, wildlife, and other issues, and we're trying to build community. I also would like to have somewhere added that fences should not be placed or built over utility or other easement areas because it makes it really hard to access and people don't want to disturb the fence or have to pay for it to be put up again. I don't know if it's possible to put in an intent about fencing. I know the 8 foot fence or up to 8 foot fence isn't supposed to be used often. I wrote, while fences are allowed and sometimes desirable, they may even be needed for safety. Use of a fence, though, is counter to connectivity, wildlife, interacting within and between communities and neighborhoods. Fences separate and divide, and they make our landscape into cubicles. Fences can screen things and add privacy, but they can also block light and solar access. Even when and if needed or desired, artistic or more open style fencing materials improve aesthetics. Having breaks in the length of the fencing will allow for access and would help wildlife commute. There's also wildlife friendly types of fencing that could be employed, so like bunny rabbits can go under them. It would seem that often planning before you build, using plants and landscaping could really just avoid the fences altogether. And lastly, with urban forestry management plan upcoming, we're going to be talking about plants and landscaping, and I think that having fences and those things are in conflict with each other, so let's not make really strong fence code right now. Let's have an intent written about it. And I just think it needs to happen because people just want to put up a fence, they hire somebody and they really don't think about it. So I think the changes that David made were very good, but I just wanted to make my point on fencing there. I did give some other examples. It's too numerous to go through. They're just very small things. I'd like to ask a couple key questions on the parking spaces. Does that apply only to new lots, or would it also apply to any lots that are already existing, such as in Tamarack or Inglewood or on the lake or other places? Also, if you're going to start changing the widths and the setbacks down, is the city ever going to call anything as unbuildable? I know King County has said lots are unbuildable in the past. And also, you might have lots that maybe could build, and now with the new setbacks, they either need variances or they have to become reasonable use exceptions or RUEs to build. And are you making staff have a lot of RUEs come at you because those people want to build, and the only way to do it is through an RUE, and that will give a lot of overhead to staff. So I don't know if you thought about that. I think a lot of their changes were well thought out and well communicated by staff. And then the only other thing I had is I had typos, errors, and omissions, which I think are self-explanatory the way I've written them. And on the last page that I did, I put in some water quality things. In my reading for stormwater, I learned that mulch needs to be city approved because it can have high phosphorus or pH. And I wanted to put in the note about Portland concrete being affected for stagnant bogs, which are bogs over 1,000 years old. So I don't know if that goes in this packet or somewhere else, but I wanted to include my input. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary.
With the chair's permission, I wanted to appreciate Ms. Wicker directing her presentation to the commission, and secondly, all the hard work and effort, time and effort that she put in, and for the other people who will or may present tonight, the same goes for you. We appreciate the time that you're taking to come and address the commission. Thank you in advance.
Well, I'll wait. Okay. Larry Farmer.
I apologize. I thought it was a sign-in sheet. So I signed in. But I do want to say that I enjoyed working a lot with the planning department. They're a good group. Everybody there is really nice. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Farmer. Okay, James Eastman is next.
James Eastman, 3636 East Lake Sammamish Parkway, Northeast. I'd like to commend you guys. I think you guys did a
fairly good job at just code. Apparently, there's always room for improvement, right? But I did like how you kind of weeded through the noise of the code to get to the intent. I think it's, you're able to get rid of some of the other unnecessary stuff that was added in, but keep the intent of what you're looking for. I sent over pictures. Did anybody get it?
Yeah.
So, yeah, so this is just the ADU. It's my friend's ADU. My sister-in-law lives next door to him. But this ADU would definitely not be allowed under your guys' code. It's actually a tower. But there's nobody within a few hundred feet of their house. So it plays in good with the character of the house. It's beautiful. You go up on the second floor, there's the living area, or the kitchen, the living area on the third floor. You just saw that top picture. That's their ADU, and it's beautiful. And I said to my wife, we could do that on our property in Sammamish. It would be in the forest, we'd keep it with trees all around it, and then we could have a beautiful view of the lake. Let's do that. Let's build our ADU similar to how they built theirs, but let's make it kind of more of a Fort Northwest style. And it would go great with the character of the city and the forest. And so I was a little dismayed, Mr. Boffman, when we did the ADU height limit of 15 feet. But I'm hoping you guys will put a number 1 with quotation marks around it, or something that says for every 1 foot setback, you could go 1 foot higher. For every 5 foot setback, you could go 1 foot higher. Because in reality, there's a lot of places in the city that I'm not going to have a neighbor within 100 feet of me. I'm going to be creating less impact by building higher. I'm going to be creating less impact by not cutting down as many trees, because I actually want to be in the trees. That's the whole point of building that style of ADU. And I know that was a huge struggle when you guys did this code, is everyone imagines themselves in their neighborhood and having this ADU looking down right at them. And I get that. That's why the code is the way it is. But I'd encourage you guys to allow people that maybe are on bigger lots to have that setback. I know before, I think there was you could build a house up to 75 foot tall if you got big enough setbacks in the old code. I think that's gone, right? I didn't see it in the new one, but anyways, it'd be nice to have just a little bit of flexibility for character and for architectural standards, even if it's for every 2 feet you get a setback, or every 3 feet. For people that aren't going to be near anybody, you're kind of forcing us into this box, and I don't think that's the intent of what we're trying to do. We're trying to build character through in our city. And I don't know, I also had another thought. I hate it when I drive through a neighborhood. Absolutely hate it, and you have to dodge cars. I thought, what if you just made the streets wide enough just for 2 cars to go by, and had Mr. Powell's parking area that could accommodate the rest? I mean, I think that's maybe an idea, I don't know. And then have wider landscaped areas between the park strips, between this curb and the sidewalk. But some type of alternative for all the street parking. I think that's become an issue in the city, and it's going to be one. Other than that, I think there's a lot of progress, but I would like to see some height limits or height flexibility if you're not close to your neighbor. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Eastman. That's the end of the list. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak?
Karen Heron, 23684 Southeast 32nd West. I like some of the development regulations. I don't like development, so I can't like them all. I do want to say something about the parking. I think it's great that we have that new development regulation in there, because in my neighborhood, there are new development happening where all the streets have a no parking fire lane sign on every single inch of the street. So when you have a Super Bowl party and your 30 friends come over, guess where they're going to park? They're going to park in the old country street neighborhood that can't really have a bunch of cars parking down there because that's where people's homes are. The other thing is the mass grading. When you have development coming in and digging out a hole, changing the topography of a neighborhood, that's damaging your neighbors that are downhill. We get the runoff from the change of that topography. I know it's supposed to be controlled or managed, but it isn't all the time. So I saw a development happen at around 243rd-ish and Southeast 32nd Way, and Southeast 32nd, and they actually dug out part of the land there, and there are homes built on stilts, and new slopes were developed, and there's no backyard. It's a slope. It's like somebody built a house in Galveston in, sunny hills. So, and the last thing is, when Mary talked about landscaping, if we can have our code consider going native when we do landscaping, rather than having our new developments have HOAs with pristine grasses and, little trees that aren't really natural to the environment, we can improve our entire environment and the critters and the natural living things that live here already that we like to keep, or I would. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen.
Hi, Commissioners. Gina Clark with Master Builders. I want to apologize for getting my comments to you late. I'm sure you can relate, but our server completely crashed and we can't figure out why. So we have no internet or computer use or anything else at Master Builders. So we feel your pain probably not as much as you do. So I want to direct you to your email accounts if you have not seen it already, and then just walk you through some of our comments. And then, as always, let you know that we are available to meet or to answer any questions if you have any questions after I speak. Again, thank you to staff and to all of you for the opportunity to speak and for all of your hard work. One of the commenters before me said that the development regulations have come a long way. I definitely agree that there has been improvement since we saw the emergency regulations, for sure. But we do think that there is some improvement that still needs to happen. And did you guys receive my comments at all? And is it possible to submit, do I need to submit hard copies for the record, or did you get them? Okay. Todd with Murray Franklin is going to be speaking after me, but I wanted to walk through some of the changes and suggestions, if I could, just to have those on record. One of the things with density, if we could make a suggestion, is with the roundup and the calculations, if we could change as a suggestion the 0.5 to short plats instead of long plats. We think that that would benefit, have much greater value for short plats rather than long plats, and kind of switch those numbers, so the 0.5 for short plats and the 0.7 for long plats. And then setbacks. We know there's been a lot of discussion about this and a lot of back and forth, and we appreciate all the effort that staff has put into this. We know City Council has debated this and deliberated, and we know you have too. We would like to suggest coming down a little bit on that. So in the R4 and R6, for a home greater than 4,000 square feet, if we could have that setback at 20 feet in total. Homes 2,500 to 4,000 square feet, 15 feet in total, and homes under 2,500 square feet at 10 feet in total. One of the things that we're finding that sometimes needs additional explanation in other jurisdictions is that when we're working with lots of that size or in the R4, R6 zones is that we have other constraints as well that we like to remind people of. So tree retention policies, stormwater detention, road widths, impervious limits, lot coverage. So if we can consider those as well as those setbacks, sometimes the lot limitations do become constrained when we're talking about increasing those setbacks all around. Grading, we have seen, I know that David mentioned that there were some pretty significant changes to grading in the interim emergency regulations, but we would like to see some of the language in particular is still pretty subjective and risky. And for a developer, and we would think for the city too, one of the things that we would like to see happen is some of that language made more predictable. And right now we feel it's uncertain. Let's see here. Oh no, my computer's not working, so that makes it even better. I can't even scroll now. Is this like a vortex of evil for technology? Okay. Let's see. Okay. So, okay, here we go. Now it's moving. It says, for example, the tops and toes of cut and fill slopes shall be set back from property boundaries as far as necessary. So just as an example, what measure or who, the city or the applicant, determines as necessary? And what measure or predictable criteria exists for necessary? So we worked with the city of Kirkland and a number of their residential neighborhood associations to help modify their tree ordinance code. And we've taken out a lot of this language as necessary, where feasible. And we work together to develop more measurable standards. And we're happy to continue to work with your staff. And if this moves forward tonight to City Council, if you feel comfortable moving this forward, to continue to work through with City Council on that language to help make it more definable and just eliminate that risk so it's more predictable for our developers and for the city as well. I think Todd had some comments on access tract elimination. I'm not sure if you're going to go into that. I don't know where he went. He's not there. There he is. And a few other things. I just want to say that since these development regulations were adopted, as of Tuesday, I think was the last time I checked in, there have been no permits pulled. So I know that there have been some questions, obviously, of where the city stands as far as what to do and where these regulations are going and how they got here and why they got here and the political climate around that. We've all worked through it. Staff has certainly been through it. You've been through it. We've been through it. And your community's been through it. What I would ask is that if you feel comfortable tonight and you feel like your questions have been answered and that this public input process has done what it needed to do to answer your questions, and by all means, please move it forward. But if it hasn't, I know there's going to be some changes coming up on your commission, and there will be re-education of some of those commissioners or education of some of those commissioners. But don't rush us through the process. If you all feel that you need more time to talk to more community members or talk to industry, please take that time to do so. So we get these regulations right and answer some of these questions and concerns that industry may have or that your citizens may have as well. And know that we will continue to be here to work with your staff or with your council if it does get moved forward to have meetings. I know we sometimes wear that black hat, but we're here to, I don't have a black hat on right now. I would love to meet with your council or with any of you just to talk about how this is implemented and how it works on boots on the ground for some of our members. So happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Gina.
Chair Collins, before Mr. Levitt speaks, I'd like to just enter, I guess, into the record, if nothing else. The city hasn't received or issued any permits since Friday, January 18th. It was over the long weekend, the Martin Luther King holiday, that our systems started to experience difficulty, severe difficulty, I think would be a more appropriate term. So nothing's happened in the last couple of weeks with permits anyway. We're working to reestablish some business lines here as quickly as possible while some of our systems do start to come back online. And we hope we'll be in a little bit better position next week than what we have been for the last couple. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Todd Levitt, 26444 Southeast Goop Hill Road. Before I get my comments, Commissioner Thomas, can I just ask a follow-up question to Mr. Thomas so there's a clarification for the commission? And then I got a couple of questions for Mr. Pyle, if that's okay. Mr. Thomas, Jeff, just so we're clear, have any land use permits, when was the last new land use permit since the moratorium? Have any come into the system under the interim development regulations?
Well, Mr. Levitt, why don't you go ahead and make your public comments to the commission, and then we'll be happy to follow up with the commission.
Okay, I was just clarifying what Gina said. I think she misspoke what she said permits, which was, I think you were applying to building permits. I was just wondering on land use permits, which I think might have mixed the make up the topic. Dave, would you mind going to, I had a clarifying question on slide 7, I believe it was. And it had to do with access tracks or private streets, if I recall. I want to make sure I was reading that correctly and understanding that correctly. So make sure I'm understanding, Dave, is this allowing now the use of access tracks off of public streets for new development? Is that, am I reading that correctly, or?
The code in its prior form with the interim regs and this current version has never precluded or prohibited the use of access tracks for the purpose of accessing a property.
I thought the interim development regs required every lot to be fronting onto public street, at least 30 feet fronting on public street.
That is correct. I was answering the question, and that the code had not prohibited the use of an access track. Doesn't mean you could not also include an access track so long as the lot also has a frontage on a street.
So this is saying, though, it still has to have frontage on a public street, is that correct?
That is correct, although it does not prohibit the use of an access tract.
Okay, so some portion of it has to be on a public street there. Okay,
That is
trying to understand. And then, so I understand the setbacks, Dave.
Mr. Lovitz, can you do your comments, and then if you
Well,
can direct your questions to us, we can.
Well, it's part of my comments, so I understand before I make my comments, I wanted these clarifying questions on if I had.
I'd actually rather have you just speak directly to us, and then we can ask the questions.
Okay. I'm just trying to make sure I understand what I read. If you had a 4,100 square foot house, if you were building, would the setback on that side setbacks be, the way I read it, 30 feet for that size of a product over 4,000 square feet?
Is it for the R4?
Correct.
R4, and you want it 4,100 square feet?
If you were building a 4,100 square foot house, say hypothetically.
The front setback is not less than 25 feet. The side setback is an average of 12 feet, but no less than, at no point less than 10 feet. And the rear setback is an average of 25 feet, but at no point less than 15 feet.
Okay, all right. So my comments are, certainly appreciate commission and staff with where they're at compared to where we were with the urban development regs. I think, I'm guessing when Mr. Thomas comes back and maybe answers that question, I don't think yet any new land use permits have come in under the interim development regs moratorium, so it's probably been 17 months since anybody's been able to, or really no permits to be able to come in land use applications in regards to this, because essentially to put the city continue to be in a de facto moratorium. While what's being proposed here is certainly a little bit better than where we were or what was put in place in September, you know, you have to understand as a developer, as a builder, how we look at a piece of property, and you have to understand the totality of the story. When you're looking at a property, we all understand you have to put public streets in. Those start at a minimum R4 at 60 feet, and R6 go up to 68 feet. You have large stormwater detention facilities take up to 30,000 square feet, 25, 30, 35,000 square feet. You have tree retention requirements, which start at 35%. And if you're in the Beaver Lake or Pine Lake, Beaver Creek, Beaver Lake, Pine Lake Basin, you're up to 50%. You have critical areas, you have open space, you have a lot within the code that you have to accommodate. And so you're just continuing to squeeze what's left to actually build on these properties. And so, you know, it was already well constrained under the old code, and certainly this doesn't help things. You continue, I have examples, I'd be happy to share them based on at least the interim development regs that show R4. We analyzed 3 properties. R4 continues to be in a R2.5 2.6 range, and R6 is R3.7, 3.8 range of what you're able to get from a density perspective. We looked at this very closely. And so I'll echo Gina's comments in regards to, I think you need a continued look at these, what you're proposing here. You move through it, I think, fairly quickly. When you look at the grading criteria is generally Bellevue criteria. And if you ask Bellevue, if you went down to Bellevue and asked them when the last long plat they did, I know that answer because I'm doing one right now, but the one previous was 15 years ago. They don't have long plats in Bellevue. You guys still have some long plats left. They're not putting in major streets and infrastructure in Bellevue. You're doing a lot of 2 lots, 3 lot short plats. The grading criteria makes a little more sense. And oh, by the way, if you go to Bellevue, you know the average price point in Bellevue? Probably 1.8, 2 million, somewhere in that range. They can support some of this grading criteria because it's very costly what's in place here with this current grading criteria. You heard Gina mention some of the language within it. When you hear language like necessary or at the discretion of the city engineer or the director, that's risky to a developer. By the time you're getting to a review on that grading criteria, you're hundreds of thousands of dollars into a project, and you don't know at what discretion or what necessary means. Therefore, you're not going to take that risk to move forward on a piece of property based on that kind of language. So I think, again, some good strides have been made here. I think you need to continue to look at them closer before you move forward, because again, nothing's moved forward, and the development community is all talking and watching, and nobody is comfortable right now that I've talked to. And I know a lot of the builders and developers moving forward under this current language. In regards to parking, again, your R4 public works standards requires 60 feet of right-of-way, which is parking on one side of the road. So when you take a garage, you take a driveway, you have 4 spots right there off the bat on the property, you have 1 on the street. R6 requires 68 feet of right-of-way, which is parking on both sides of the street. Again, the way the language reads right now is at the discretion of the reviewer on what else do you need to accommodate for parking and how that criteria is determined. You don't know that when you're going into it. So I would tell you, public work standards address that. If you want, if I could just have just a couple of minutes because I was asking, or a minute, because I was asking a couple of questions, Commissioner Collins.
Actually, I don't think, I'm sorry, Mr. Levitt, so it's not really fair to the rest of the...
Okay, can I just finish up my comments then, real quick?
Real quick.
I'll just support also on the density. Again, there's a lot more at stake for a short plat, so I ask if you do consider that to flop that to short plats, about 0.51 threshold versus long plats. There's a lot more at stake for a small property owner than a larger property owner when it comes to density capability. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Levitt.
Good evening again, planning commissioners. My name, Paul Stickney, 22626 Northeast Inglewood Hill Road. I only have one comment on the regulations themselves and then a concept to suggest, recommend that you add to your motion on this. The thing I was going to suggest is it looks like ADUs that are detached. It looks like the height went from 15 to 18 feet. Is that what I saw here? In here? Well, maybe I didn't see it right in there. I was just looking at it. It's either 15 or 18.
The new height is 18.
Is 18, good, okay. Yeah, I'm in real estate, as you know, and I've worked all over the east side for years and years. And most cities, I haven't read the code, I've observed. They have ADUs at the rear of a lot many times that are on top of a shop or another building or a structure or a garage where somebody wants a third car that's in the back, or a little workshop or an artist studio or a photography place, and then they put a staircase in there and have a little ADU over that. Should there be any consideration for potentially 2-story ADUs, not 2 stories of living space, but where either the ADU is on the bottom and there's a storage area, or a second story, and I'm not talking a third, but a lot of times I've seen across the east side a 2-story structure where one level was an ADU and one level was some sort of other use that the person was interested in. I was just saying maybe that's something to consider. And then, I'm not sure how fast this is going to move to City Council, but in my opinion, I'm going to take a swag, just kind of a wild guess. I think that since the tree retention ordinance was adopted up to 35%, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, I would say, I'm going to guess that there's been more than 10 and less than 50 short plats and long plats, and let's say short plats over 5 lots. So I'm not talking about a onesie doozy, but a long plat and short plat, I'm going to guess it's more than 10 and under 50. I'd suggest that, and I don't know if this can be done, so I'm going to put in a caveat, but if it can be, I'd suggest that those plats be overlaid with these regulations and look at the net lot numbers. It's not the most important thing, but it's a important thing to consider in adopting these changes. I appreciate the staff coming up with an example. Murray Franklin turned in 3 examples I talked about last time when I spoke at the wrong time because I thought that I was going to have to leave them. I try to stick by the rules. Anyway, I would suggest that a larger sample, and again, I just think it's wise to look at these things from sort of 2 sides. So knowing what the true impact is on a larger example of plats, I think is good information for making an informed overall decision on this by the City Council. Not for you recommending it. That's my end recommendation that I started with, is that if you feel it appropriate, suggest that the city considers studying a larger sample of plats and short plats since the tree retention was enacted, and what would have happened had these regulations been on those instead. That's it.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak during the public hearing? Okay, then I will close the public hearing. Public hearing is now closed. And I would ask, if there are any questions from public comment that you guys want to direct to staff? Okay. Then let's go ahead and, do you have a recommended motion, David? Any chance?
Just that we adopt or make a recommendation to City Council that the interim the permanent proposed development regulations as included in as Exhibit 1 or Attachment 1 with the packet be forwarded to the City Council for consideration.
Okay. Anyone want to take a stab at that?
My recommended motion was in the computer system. So.
I'll do it. Let's see. Okay, I move that the Planning Commission approve the permanent, just make sure I have this right, the draft permanent development regulations as seen in Exhibit 1, draft proposed permanent development regulations be forwarded to Council for their consideration.
Second.
There's a motion and a second to take Exhibit 1, draft proposed permanent development regulations to City Council. Is there any deliberation?
I just wanted to be sure, Mary submitted some, and she had some concerns, and that will go with public record to City Council, and they will see everything she had to say, because I think she had some great things to say about grading, etc., that I'd like City Council to hear what she had to say, and she's so knowledgeable on the subject. I think it's worth making sure all those comments get further upstream.
I agree.
First of all, I'd like to thank the staff for doing the research and the outreach and being open to feedback to the suggestions that we have made, to the suggestions the public has made, and also to the panel that you have assembled. I think a lot of work has gone into this to really understand the concerns of the people in Sammamish, and the concerns that we have brought up. I think when I have tried to look at these regulations, the lens that I've kind of put on is, the community character. I think that has been very important. How do these regulations and the changes that we're making, how will they affect Sammamish as a whole? Also the environment. I think that has also been very important to keep in mind, is how will they impact. So, I had reached out earlier to staff today to get clarifications on what the changes meant. And I think, we're going to a place where we're going in the right direction. So I'm really happy with what we've come up with so far, and really appreciate all the public input that we've had so far as well.
Chair. Excuse me, I'll be very brief. About a week ago, I had some dental implant surgery, so my upper lip and jaws are still a little numb, which is, you don't have to applaud. But I want to say that I second what Ratusha said, and let's get this moving forward to the City Council with this operating language. And I don't want to put burden on the City Council, but maybe they can tweak a few things. So that's all I know.
A couple little things. One is I agree with Roisin about Mary's comments. In particular, I'm hopeful that some of the little spell check, grammar, periods, and so forth can be done without us being involved in that. And if it goes to council, then that can just be taken care of. I do think that some of her comments I agree with, and not all of them completely, but I think it was good input and a lot of work. And I had to read it in about 5 minutes. So I guess one of the questions I would have, there was some comments, both written and in the public comment, about things that were to the discretion of the director or the engineer. And I want to just test that between you, David, and Jeff as well. Is there really that much more in these regs than what we had before? I mean, I feel like there was a couple spots, but I didn't get the perception from reading through the things that we changed that there was much more discretion and subjectivity placed on the various people in those positions within the staff. Can you comment on that, having written all this?
So with regard to the grading restrictions?
Well, in general, there's a few places where it says that. I think there's also some places where it can be taken out of context. If you don't read the rest of the sentence, you miss the fact that the rest of the sentence describes what that discretion is supposed to be. I saw several of those. But there is some places where there is some discretion.
There were a few points of discretion added. This is also being forwarded concurrently on a parallel path to our legal counsel, and they are currently in review of this. So we likely will have some comments back on those elements, and they will make recommendation with clarification language that might help avoid points of ambiguity where we would debate with a citizen because we're being told we didn't apply it properly, or a builder because we're being told we didn't apply it properly.
I guess I'm not afraid of that, but I also recognize that people in that position can be put in an uncomfortable position unnecessarily. But I didn't perceive there was really that much more of it than what was in the regulations before.
It's not extreme, although there are some points. And now understand that with regard to grading, we're going from a position of having zero restriction on grading to having restrictions. So of course the development community is going to be nervous about that because they're going from a place of no restriction to a point of restriction.
I guess the thing I do, one of the few things I do kind of agree with is that the more we can remove ambiguity, the better it is for both sides, particularly for the folks in this building that have to implement that stuff. So if we can find a way to minimize some of that, is better for everybody. But I'm not afraid of having it in there if it's appropriate either.
And our legal counsel loves to find things like that, so I'm sure they will find some of that.
I'd like to echo some of the comments, appreciation of staff who grinding through this. It's, I'm sure, loads of fun. I also want to recognize some of the public comment, and I guess this is the time to do it. I think the first thing that comes to mind is, I think, something that Mary said related to the amount of cut. And I think having that 4 foot, you know, if 5 foot's the place where you need to have engineering, maybe that's kind of the trigger for multiple things instead of having a kind of a 2-step trigger, perhaps, as an idea. I think that her idea, thoughts about adding into the list of drainage type of considerations, some general note about septic systems, because there's a lot of septic systems on the plateau, and there's a lot of old septic systems on the plateau, and sometimes they're couldn't be quite close to the property line. So I think just having some of that recognized, if there's some room for that.
If I could add one comment there, and that is that these are great comments that we received, although many of these, if not the bulk of them, relate to existing sections of code that were not proposed to be modified with these proposed permanent development regulations.
Right, and I have a sense that there's a lot of that, right, because it kind of gets back in there, and it's hard to chase all those rabbits down all those holes, and that's the nature of code, I know. There was a mention about the ambiguity of cut slopes kind of back some given distance, and I know that in a lot of jurisdictions, like 1-to-1 is a pretty standard one, and maybe that's an area where that ambiguity gets removed, and the 1-to-1 is a pretty standard and accepted kind of geotechnical safe zone, and then if it can be proven through geotechnical engineering that you can increase that or decrease it or whatever you want to say, then so be it. I think that makes sense.
I would just comment that that's one of those places, if you read the whole sentence, that's what it says.
Right.
So that's kind of taken out of context when it's presented as ambiguity. It's actually in there exactly as you described.
Sure. Setbacks, I think that I view this as I think has been mentioned, it's just a prescription, right? So this is kind of a prescription is going to be safe. It's going to be on the safe side. I get conservative or liberal. I don't know how you view it, but and then of course if you go into it's the same as the prescriptive foundation design. You know, there's certain things, and it becomes untenable at certain kind of characteristics, and it's just using prescription just doesn't make sense, and it makes more sense to get an engineer involved and have them do a foundation design for you. And I look at this this is the prescription we're going to be developing in the future, this higher level engineered type of approach, so to speak, that will have an opportunity, we'll all have an opportunity to kind of make it work better for us in those instances when it must. So thank you for working through this.
Okay, so I want to echo all the other comments. Thank you, staff, for working so quickly, especially during your computer crisis. Sounds like a nightmare. Sorry about that. And thank you to the public for all of your thoughtful additions and comments, suggestions. And I just want to say that I feel that the commission had some really smart ideas and some really thoughtful additions to the regulations that I really appreciate. Excuse me, I like the way the incentive for building a wider diversity of housing types ended up working out in the density rounding section. I like the dynamic setbacks for different size homes. I think that was a really smart way to go. The height for the ADUs and the special setbacks for ADUs so that we don't limit those in the city. A little bit of flexibility on that public street frontage, allowing for the private street instead of the public street on all. And one of my favorites is the 30-foot setback on all the arterial streets. So I think really good start. It does sound like City Council will have a few things to look at, like the daylight plane by segments. That's something that's very interesting. And maybe they won't look at that in this specific phase, but in the future. Also the blended edge on the perimeter for the mass grading. And James Eastman brought up a really good point about the height on the ADUs. And I think I like this idea of the dynamic, you take a foot, you get a foot. That's a neat way to go. So something to consider.
Can I respond to that? So with regard to the ADUs, you only are eligible for that 5-foot setback if you're building an 18-foot high ADU. If you wanted to combine your ADU with, say, a garage or something else, then you would be subject to the standard setback category. So the way the code is drafted now, if you want to build a standalone independent ADU in a detached accessory dwelling unit along the rear or side property line, you would be afforded a 5-foot setback with an 18-foot tall ADU. If you wanted to combine your ADU with a garage, covered outdoor kitchen, storage area, something else that was an additional use beyond just the ADU, then you would be subject to the standard setback, and also the building height.
That's right. So if you had enough space, you could build a structure that was higher than 18 feet. Okay.
Plus, I'm not exactly sure that tower complies with the square footage requirements either, so.
Or even the standard height limit.
Right, that's probably a more traditional building.
It's beautiful. Christine just wants to live there.
It's beautiful.
Okay, so those are the end of my comments, and I don't have any amendments, and I wanted to double check. Does anybody on the commission have an amendment to make?
Not an amendment, I just had a quick comment. I think I have personally benefited very much from the technical knowledge, especially that Commissioner Brooks and Commissioner Baughman have brought. I think that has pushed us to think about better solutions for our community, and I really appreciate the contribution, so thank you.
I agree, thank you.
Without putting anything in jeopardy, I would call for the question.
Of course you would. All right. There's a motion and a second to forward the permanent regulations presented by staff in Exhibit 1 to City Council. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed say no. And the motion passes unanimously. Nice work. Hey.
Can I make one quick comment for the record?
Yes.
I would hope that particularly the council, if they take a look at these sessions, and if we get the chance to talk to them, I would gladly point it out that this is exactly what the Planning Commission is supposed to do. The council created some high level, this is our objective. We dug into it, worked with David and others to refine it in a way that seems reasonable, worked out the details, and are providing back to them something that they can dig into and hopefully implement. I just want to say thank you because I think this is exactly what we're supposed to do, and I hope that the staff and David and his folks realize that we appreciate their help. I hope that future members of this commission will recognize the same thing, that this is what we're supposed to do. And I hope the council will similarly recognize that we're working to serve on their behalf. And that's what we're trying to accomplish. And this is the way it's supposed to work. So I would say good job and thank you.
I agree. Thank you, Mark.
The only comment I have, and about 7 or 8 years ago, they actually had a sign-in sheet for everyone that came in the room. They did away with that for a number of reasons, but.
We could make a special case.
Okay. Well, this is my last adjournment, so I move to adjourn.
Oh, before that, then we should say a few words about you.
No, you shouldn't.
Yes, we
You
should.
should adjourn.
Yes, I would like to say a few words. I didn't realize, I think I was in denial. But Chair Collins, you have led the meeting so admirably. I think you've given all of us a chance to speak, encouraged us to speak even sometimes when we were uncomfortable. And I really admire your leadership on the Planning Commission. So thank you for all the work that you've done. It's a voluntary job. And I want to point out that I think you exemplified the voice of the people in the community. So thank you for bringing that to the table, and I wish you good luck.
Thank you, Rituja.
Janet, I would like to echo what Rituja just said. We're going to miss you. You have been our fearless leader for as long as I've been here, and you have always given everyone an opportunity to speak. I think one of the reasons that this commission has worked so well is because of the tone that you set on the dais, and so we're all very respectful of everyone's opinion, even when we don't agree. And even when we don't agree, you don't even notice it too much, because we're very respectful of each other's opinions, and I have always appreciated that. And having come to this commission with no public service experience, and have felt very comfortable right away, felt a valuable member of this dais, and that's because of you. And I want to thank you very much. It's been a wonderful experience having you here. So thank you, Shannon.
Thank you.
I guess I hope some other comments are made, but the only comment I have and the only appreciation I really have is your attendance, because I think I only had to sit in twice or 3 times.
And you did such a good job when I was gone.
I'll build on that. I guess I share probably some unstated nervousness about who's going to take over for your fine job.
There's plenty of you here to fill my shoes.
I don't think that's true. I would just add, Shannon, that I think I've enjoyed this past year myself. I'm grateful that we got the chance to work together. I think it's exceptional and sometimes unusual at this dais and in public service to find people that are genuinely nice, also have the ability to be tough when necessary, and are not motivated by self-interest. And you're one of those rare birds. So I really appreciate the time that we got to work together and the work that you've done here. I think our community is better for it. Thank you.
Thank you all. You're too kind, and you will function just well without me. It's been a real pleasure to work with all of you and to work with staff, so thank you for your time. There's a motion on the table.
I second the motion to extend the meeting till today.
I need a second.
Second.
I'm not going to second Larry's motion.
I second the adjournment.
Thank you. There's a motion and a second to adjourn. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed say no. Okay, so the meeting is adjourned at 8:03 p.m.